what I found about the last hour and a half is that there's great opportunity for our sport. There's not a lot of negativity that emerged from these people. They're very successful people. They've identified what we need to do. What we need to do first and foremost, though, is understand that there's an urgency about contemporising our business. We need to be ahead of all the other sports. At the moment, I don't get the feel that a lot of these other sports are that far ahead of us. So we've got an opportunity. But within 5 years, we're going to be that far behind that we won't have the resource to catch up. So we need agility. We need decision makers. For a fleeting moment, I wished I was 20 years younger so I could be back in the field of being a racing administrator again. But then a reality check kicked in and said, no, you're too old and there's too much trouble there. But what I learnt is that there's exciting times for people in our sport. I look at our demographics. Ali shows a demographic there. Andrew showed a demographic. They're not compatible, but what it says is there's a vast demographic out there, just we don't do a good enough job of encouraging these people to invest in our sport to the extent and measure it the way that Nick explained. And the golden age of sponsorship, Giles, I truly believe that the linkage between what Nick does and what you're philosophizing, that's the golden opportunity for us. So I feel really confident about our sport. And it's because you've woken up the sleeping bear in a sense. But the key message for me is that we cannot procrastinate. We've got to be a sport that's out there and doing things and committing resource instead of just spending nickels and dimes on research and development. As a sport, we've got a time frame to capitalise, and that time frame's now, and it needs to be done urgently. So I'd like to thank our four speakers, and then let's throw it open to the floor, David, and see what questions we can get to pose.
Absolutely, Greg. Thanks very much for laying that out. And we have got a couple of questions already, so please keep them coming. But Nick, I just want to start with you on 2 points, if I may. You talked about the fire hose and that sort of absolute wash of information, digital coming our way. I think we've had a bit of that, actually, in the last 40, 45 minutes or so. And can I also say, I didn't know ARPU, and I suspect I'm not the only one. Average revenue per user. It's not the Asian Racing Performance Upsurge, which I thought it could have been. So, but let me ask you this. As that flood hits racing, hits us all, what are you really saying about what racing should do with it? Are you actually saying you need to work with every punter, every fan as an individual and see them as an individual? Or do you still have to try and extrapolate, try and come up with some sort of some generalizations? Because you've got to manage a business here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that generally we'd say segmentation. That might be, agencies speak might call it personas. And you know, I think of personas of horse racing, I might just put a metaphor of a hat. There's a flat cap, there's a top hat, there's a flower hat, there's a helmet, there's a cowboy hat, there might be a turban. These are the hats of horse racing, right? And there's a different person and different persona around all of those different things, right? So now, my ability to move data around and develop personas is based on the elemental level of each fan and each fan's engagement in my content sphere. And my content can be let's start with the race course. It's easy to understand. And that fan journey within the race course, the gambling inside the race course, the bet, all of that. So I have to make an account already. Well, okay, that's running the gambling. What else could we put as part of that profile that might be useful for building personas, for example, right? And also, can we bring together, and this is where partnership comes in. I know it's different in different regions, right? But, you know, where can I be, forgive my own lack of intelligence in the industry, let's just say racing.com, what trade can they make with New South Wales or Victoria in a mutually beneficial trade of information that's obviously ethical and everything else. It's improving the content delivery to the fan, improving the overall concept of who those people are. But you're only at some level, you're only as good as the data bits, and it's about kind of the magnet that's kind of bringing them all together. And so what's going to happen is there's this proliferation of opportunity of more engagement bits that are happening with the things that were discussed this morning, from AR to virtual reality to just advances in different kinds of international gambling through commingling, which I've learned a lot about today.
Right, and Giles, how much does the sponsor value that, rather than perhaps the issues of the sport, of racing, for example? So knowing precisely what each and every fan is like and wants, as opposed to what a sport like racing actually has to play with and to offer a sponsor.
It's really interesting. Sponsorship for years has been one side of the brain, which has been all about the emotion and the fit. So you have a brand that fits with racing, with the values of racing, fit the aspired values of a brand. That's a big tick. But the trouble is with that business model, it's emotion. There's nothing beyond that. And that's why sponsorship, I think, for years and years has been the poor cousin of advertising, because you didn't have the business case to back up the emotive case. We all understand the emotive case. Why I'm excited and why I talk about a golden era of sponsorship coming through data is that now you can connect the emotive case with the business case of people, fans, to then create a business model. And I use an example of a sport that HSBC sponsored. It's the last one I did. I won't say which one. But the data I got was non-existent, which meant that the value that this sport could sell to me was non-existent, which meant that the asking price that they asked for and the net price was 70% below what they wanted. But they still took it. And yet, had they had that data, it would be worth 3 times what their asking price was. So the industry is catching up, and I wish, well, put another way, if I were doing the job I used to do at HSBC, and I was setting sail, HSBC have just announced their results, so they're going to have a whole brand new lot of business objectives for 21 and beyond, I can absolutely guarantee that what HSBC sponsor would not be the same as they are today, based on metrics and data that didn't used to exist. That's why I'm excited as a sponsorship person, is as a new business case.
Just apropos, actually, why didn't you sponsor racing?
It was complicated, but largely due to, and if Winfried was here, he would be smiling.
He's watching.
He's watching. Well, then he knows is that there's a very strong correlation between the Hong Kong Bank and the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which is predicated why there's never been a sponsorship.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much for that. Just clear that up. Andrew, can I ask you? You've shown some amazing stories there, and I think everyone gets, the power of personal stories and bringing the horse in. Very effective. But can you show in any way that those sorts of stories are having an impact on the reputational damage, for example, that was witnessed in Australia last year?
I think I would have expressed it as an opportunity for us. We see the data in social of the sharing and the pickup of who's promoting it and pushing it, but we do not buy any social audiences. We don't boost. It's only organic. And these very talented people up here would have a field day doubling the effect of our content. I think we've done a good job on that issue of week 1 welfare in our community. We're getting seeds of it coming out through social in other people. In the equine community, we're getting good feedback. But I wouldn't say that we've had an effective outcome in pushing it into the broader non-equine, non-racing community. We would need very smart advice on how to drive search engine optimization and boosting social and targeting in social to get that done. We'd also probably need support of, say, a CNN or a major media brand to amplify that content for us.
Yeah, I want to ask Ali about that in just a second. but then, what do you put out on a social media platform? Presumably you'll put the videos out, the material. Does that mean that you are still really, I don't know if preaching to the converted is the right message, but
we're trying to get out of that.
You struggle to get beyond a sort of narrow cast to a broadcast of consumer?
Yeah, the new media platforms give you an opportunity to get out to the new audiences, but we would need a new capability to get more sophisticated about how we're doing that effectively.
Ali, I'll leave you to work out with racing.com about
Yeah,
how
sure.
you might use their material, which of course would grow it considerably. But here you are, and I'm in the same boat with BBC World, slightly smaller figures than you, as you pointed out, but that's another issue. We serve an international audience. We've got a crowd of people here who are all part of the Asian Racing Federation, but representatives from national audiences. And I just wonder if you can see how the international material works for a domestic audience. Do you think it does as well? Because you focus on travel, and you focus on glamour, and you focus on all sorts of horses, if you like, not just racing. So it's sort of a much broader, much more sort of, I don't know, diluted picture?
Yeah, I think it is slightly diluted. I think that we're trying to showcase the global nature of the sport. That's why we're here, and we've got delegates from around the world, and there aren't many other sports. There are other sports that are played or have such big industries around the world. How do you make it appeal locally? I think it goes back to what Andrew touched on, human interest stories. Everyone is interested in feel-good stories. People want to know about, we want to see the rest of those videos, we want to see what's happening there. And equally, I also think that beautifully crafted television to watch visually goes a long way. I think if you are engaged and you see wonderful sights, you see drone shots of Table Mountain, and there's Kenilworth Racecourse, and it's in the middle of a nature reserve, you think, wow. And that's also what we're trying to achieve.
Can I just say, straight after this terrific session, we will get more of those sorts of amazing shots, because we've got a session with Michelle Payne, who is now with us in Cape Town, and Richard Keddy talking about the film Ride Like a Girl. So just a good chance to trail that as well. We've got one or two questions, and this one actually is germane to what we were just talking about. And the question is a very simple one, but it's how does racing measure the value created by telling stories? Andrew, I don't know if this falls back into your pot and also into yours, Nick, a bit.
Well, I mean, to some degree, I'd say you're telling stories already, right? And I think that, I mean, that's what your sponsors are buying today, is some narrative of borrowing from the brand of racing that, you know, from somebody from the outside, as I am, would say, you know, it is, you know, you're buying the top hats and the flowers and the high-end part, but also understanding this, again, is the opportunity, right? I talk a lot about sport is a very interesting place in a world where we're getting very divided, not just politically, but socioeconomically with content. Sport is just one last place where people from many backgrounds, beliefs, et cetera, are still getting together. That's sport at its best, right? And that's happening every day at race courses. And I think that finding data to prove that story that's already happening is undervalued and has a lot of opportunity to go. And sorry, just one last point is, this again goes to sport against other, you know, if you think of a city and think of different institutions that can reach into a community, okay, and have a lot of data capability, right? And you'd say banking, telecommunications, government, maybe your Amazon Facebooks, right? And then you have sport and entertainment. These four are getting less and less trust from people. Sport is different, and sport needs to stay on that. But because of that, there's unique opportunity to collect data in a very transparent way that's relevant, that becomes unique. And then your gardens locally and then in exchange globally, et cetera, set new data sets that do not exist in the marketplace over time, and that becomes a unique value.
Andrew. Just to follow on from what Nick said, there is a bit of international cooperation that could happen out of that. If you take we are a domestic-focused business, so it's in our interest for Racing Post in the UK and World Horse Racing Group with a global social audience to share. Likewise, it doesn't compromise my audience to have our content go up to them and to bring their content into us. If you take the category of racing as a global category, it's becoming more global. An abattoir in Queensland impacted the Melbourne Spring Racing Carnival. So it's not too much of a stretch to think that an issue in America could impact the Australian racing environment. So maybe on that brand storytelling, there is international cooperation that could happen. And on Nick's point, maybe there is, like in the commingling discussion, some common metrics that we could measure and track to get a global sense of how we're treating as a sport with engagement factors and other things. That could be quite helpful. Because the global companies that we work with now to distribute the media, Facebook and others, they're globally minded. And maybe, to Giles's point, we might be trying to find maybe global sponsors.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. I've got another question here. Actually, this is a straightforward one. Falls first to you, Nick, but actually pretty much across the piece here. How much do privacy restrictions impact the value of our data? And I think you could extend that a little bit to how much do people not like knowing that you've got all our data?
Yeah, obviously, this again goes to my point too about the uniqueness of sport to be able to penetrate through the privacy wall, and the best way to do that is to ask permission. So, kind of one of the things that we talk about are setting up different components of data and data value. I mean, right now, every one of us is generating data into ad networks as we sit here, as you're on Twitter, et cetera, and you're not part of that exchange. And I think in a perfect world, and it's also creating bad data. I mean, the entire ad network system that has been extant since the mid-90s doesn't perform very well. 0.02 click rate on a display ad is not very great, and it hasn't improved over. Why not? Well, a lot of the cookies following you around aren't that great, actually. Where something like Facebook is really good and better than some of those is that it has first-party data. And that's because you've gone in, you've given that permission, you've liked pages, and that's unique in the space. But I think when you get into things like, take, for example, the facial recognition cameras. Those laws are different in different countries. They're different in different states in the US. There's different deployments of that kind of capability that meet different privacy requirements. And then also, I think, with GDPR in Europe and now in the California laws, you also need to be able to delete people's information and also really show them what you have, and that's going to increase. But I think that sport can get ahead of this because today it's really dark, and I think there's a need for transparency, and sport has a way to benefit the transparency with lots of different things. Free tickets to any kinds of things to the engagement and extra content.
Well, there's a very interesting. People talk about data in this dark area, but one of the biggest areas within digital media is obviously you take something like online dating, massive multi-billion-dollar industry. People are giving all of their information all of the time with the hope that they're going to meet people. So we do give of our data, but what Nick's point is absolutely right. We give of our data willingly, when we ask permission properly legally, which is the opportunity for the data industry to get it right. But the things that we love, the things that we care about, the things that define our humanity, our interests, are the things that we give information for. It's the things when we're not asked and we don't want to give our information. And that's why financial service companies struggle. They need information about people. You don't feel that good about giving all your information away to a bank or an insurance company, but I always use the example, if Bruce Springsteen's people, his commercial operation, said to me, tell us all about you, Giles Morgan, everything you, and in return, we'll make sure you get early bird discounts, we'll give you merchandise, we'll incentivize you. They can have the lot. Absolutely fine. It's a transaction.
But that's interesting, because Andrew, you were talking about trying to get the average bet or wagering up to twice a month instead of once a month or what have you. So it's back to that slightly dirty business of making money out of sport. How do you sort of square that circle when we talk about, you know, let's show the caring side of a sport, let's show the passion, the emotion, the bottom line is you're after the buck.
Well, you'd probably argue 70% of the economy, racing economy, well, amongst clubs and the governing bodies is a wagering economy. So at the core is that driving, but I still believe trust, and I think engagement, and I think you know, all the things we talked about, those 4 areas. Wagering will decline if those other 4 areas are not respected and amplified and enforced.
Right. And let me take another question which relates to that from the floor. Is racing behind other sports when establishing authenticity in its athletes, in its participants? That could be horses and riders, of course. And if so, what can racing do about that? Ali, you're a former Olympic sportswoman. There's much more than just racing to you. Do you, A, recognise that assertion, and B, what can racing do about it?
I think racing can definitely do better in terms of making more personalities out of the jockeys and the trainers. It's difficult with the horses themselves because there are so many horses, and in flat racing, of course, they're changing every year, or at least every 2 years. I think in the UK and Ireland, jump racing finds it easier to make a more of a personality out of their horses because they're around for 5 or 6 years. We know all that. I think we can work together globally to make stars of our jockeys. We're very lucky we've got Frankie Dettori, we've got Mike Smith at the moment, who are 2 big stars, but they're not going to be around forever. And what are we doing for the next generation, the jockeys coming through, and comparing them to sports stars elsewhere, and rugby players, football players, soccer players? Are we doing enough? And I think this is a global sport and a global effort to make them bigger personalities.
So we've heard a lot about, you know, the power of data and what is to come, and we've been enlightened by people like Nick telling us stuff that we frankly probably didn't know before this afternoon, and that's much appreciated. But we're still back, Giles, in one respect to some sort of universal truths about sponsorship, about why you'd come in and back any particular sport. I think they'd call them the hygiene questions. There are hygiene questions around racing which are only getting harder to deal with, aren't they, as we become more of this, I mean, snowflake is a dreadful term, but a more aware, more socially aware global audience out there, and that is another challenge for racing.
Yeah, I think that's true, and risk in anything is the associative risk of what company A with anything is something that is at the forefront of every corporation, particularly right now, to your point. Everybody has become quite snowflake and risk averse, and it's sort of easier to do nothing. But I think, from what I've heard, and I'm not a racing person, but what I've been absolutely blown away by is, or reminded perhaps better, is hearing from different people over the last couple of days about the breadth of the sport, particularly societally, of how many different strata of society that this sport around the world attracts. Means, yes, there are issues which need to be dealt with, because everything needs to be dealt with in terms of risk. But if you're trying to engage with people's passions, I would say that racing it's a pretty strong foundation stone. People, you know, I know from my own country, from the UK, with whatever it is, 57, 59 racecourses, this is a very well-attended sport that people engage with and love. So that's what sponsors want. They'll find a way around risk, eventually. I mean, UFC gets sponsored.
Good point.
Right? And that's smacking...
Let's not end on that note.
No, they're smacking the hell out of people. That's really risky.
Nick, you're on
Yeah, I mean, I think also one of the things that's so unique with horse racing is the horses, right? And you don't really have this in so many sports to have the animals involved. And I think, you know, it'd be interesting. I'd love to know a data point of, you know, how many, especially of newer audiences, how many have been around horses in 6 months as we've become more urbanized globally, and, you know, that sort of thing, and seeing how much we actually don't need to educate about the gambling, but educate and get people in front of horses that are so magical if you are next to one. You know, I come from a horse culture, so I get that, but I think some that don't, giving them that first experience next to a horse is quite something to deliver that this sport can do. The other thing is the strength that other sports that are maybe waning, like for example, in the States, you know, NASCAR has really tailed off, which is very different, but it was getting, you know, 100, 200,000 people a race. Your strong brands are strong with attendance, and I would argue they're getting stronger. I hear more about, you know, as an American who had, you know, I'd watched the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crowns and those sorts of things, but only recently I'm aware of, you know, Ascot at Cheltenham, some of these things that have come in through maybe CNN International. I don't, you know, it's these sorts of things as I've, you know, just as a fan, right? And the last kind of thing I'll say, horse racing is so good on video and television and sound. Let's not forget that, especially as we get some other things. And it's simple to understand. You know, you don't have to learn a whole new bag of rules. It's the fastest one across the line. It's fast, again, when people are cutting up. These are things that lots of people are trying to figure out how to do. You're sitting on it. And lastly, there's fewer sports that are as authentic and have so many authentic stories globally. And as Ali was saying, they're so different all over the world. They have an authentic locality that's local, if you will, that I think is very exciting to see from a digital value perspective.
Okay, all real positives there to close on. I'm going to stop talking there, Greg, but I'll throw it back to you to summarize and close.
I think we've extended beyond our designated time, Dave, but I certainly hope that people appreciated the depth of subject matter that we were confronted with today. As I said, I'm highly energised just hearing that there is a new paradigm out there. We're just going to take that route and we're going to do it quickly. And thank you for alerting me and hopefully alerting the crowd here. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who are already alert, but we've broadened that audience. So thank you very much, Ellie. Really much appreciated. Giles, Nick and Andrew. And thank you, David, for hosting this particular session as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody.
Well done.